Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin a two-day program on the discovery of Eros and the importance of connecting with Eros in our lives. We're convening this program very intentionally during this week, having spent several weeks, as you all know, first on strategies of resistance against the Trump regime, then the whole question of forgiveness in a time of duress. And this week, we've been looking at various techniques, various orientations of mind and soul that enable us to develop within ourselves the kind of inner equilibrium, inner coherence that is necessary to compensate for an external equilibrium that is spinning faster and faster out of control. And this is physics that if you don't balance the inner with the outer in a compensatory way, the chaos rules, not the coherence. So the cultivation of coherence within, as our world gets crazier and crazier and more out of control, till most of us have reached the point where we don't even know what's going on anymore. We don't even know how to connect the dots. Could not be more important. Oftentimes on Humanity Rising, we've investigated and discussed various techniques. There have been breathing techniques, there have been yoga techniques, there have been psychotherapy techniques, there have been trauma reduction techniques, all of which are crucially important. Today, we want to go to what many seers and philosophers have called the bedrock. And that is the cultivation of Eros. And I want to make two foundational points as we enter into this domain. Number one, drawing from Sigmund Freud, who in his last works, particularly in his last one, Civilization and Its Discontents, made the assertion that his conclusion after studying the human psyche for decades, the one who broke open the whole field of psychiatry and psychology, that was Sigmund Freud. He got a lot of things wrong. He got a lot of things right. And what he said was that his conclusion was that in the end, there's only two forces in the human soul and in the cosmos and in life itself. It's what he called Thanatos, the death instinct that everything that lives ultimately dies, apparently without exception. Even galaxies and super galaxies rise and they fall. And then he says there's this psychic cosmic force of Eros that in the midst of the living and dying, the very act of dying is an erotic experience that gives rise to more life. So he said, if we can just understand that and attune to the dying and the living and the generativity and that which is decaying, that is what gives us the kind of equilibrium internally to act in mature, ethical ways. The second point I want to make is to draw from Plato, the great Greek philosopher, who is considered by some the seminal mind of Western civilization, in the aftermath of whom, as the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead said, everything is just a footnote. Plato said that what unites the living and the dead is love. Love is that intelligence which binds all things together into a seamless whole. And that's why life serves death and death serves life. And then when he was pondering what is love, what is this intelligence that binds all things together? He says, in the end, the foundation of even love itself, and the reason why love ultimately serves beauty, is Eros. And in his masterwork, the Symposium, which is a contemplation on love, the word that Plato and Socrates, who Plato recounts at this dinner party, talking about love, the word that Socrates uses for love is Eros. And he says, if you really think about it and you really contemplate it, and he learned everything that he knew, said Socrates, from an old crone. And she taught him that there was a ladder of love. And that's why love is beneath everything that is and above everything that is. Because there's a ladder to love. And the beginning, the core of that ladder is the generative impulse of life, which is Eros. It resides at the base of the spine. You can bring it up as the ancient Indian mystics did, giving rise to Kundalini and Tantra and all these different aspects. And the great irony of our civilization, and one of the reasons why we're in such difficulties, such that we're about ready to blow ourselves up, literally, is because of the repression of the erotic. You can test it out. Anything kind of sexual, anything erotic, makes us a little uncomfortable because of the conditioning of the civilizational structures who understand that that's the most powerful force in the world. So it has to be controlled. So over the next 2 days, we're going to ponder the erotic. We're going to ponder the generativity of Eros that lies all around us in our traumas, in our confusions, in the life process itself, which ignored besets us, but which acknowledged empowers us to heal, to transform, and to embrace all the polarities of life with love. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising as we traverse as many aspects of the human condition and cosmic reality as we possibly can. And it's my great joy to welcome Rachel Pelletier to us. She's one of our graduate students at Ubiquity University. She's in our Wisdom Studies program. I have the great pleasure, it's the funnest part of my job, to talk to all the students as they come in. And when I discovered Rachel, I knew instantly that she was on to something very profound, and I invited her on to Humanity Rising. She has an MA, BA, and MA in addiction counseling. She's a certified trauma uh, 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 facilitator. She has multiple certifications and degrees, and she's really dedicated herself to an exploration of Eros and how it can heal and transform our lives. So, Rachel, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising, and Rachel's going to tell us her story and make a few comments, and then I'll circle back and we'll dialogue for the balance of the time, and then she's going to join the after chat. Thank you, Rachel, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim. It was a beautiful introduction. I actually took some notes because I loved what you said about Eros being the generative impulse of life, that it's the most powerful force in the world. And the repression of the erotic, of anything sexual, makes us uncomfortable because of our conditioning. And I would say, if I were to summarize what I'm on the planet to do, it's to liberate the sexual impulse toward eudaimonia, or human flourishing. So let's see, I'll tell you guys a little bit about me. I was telling the guys before the Zoom, when we were chatting a little bit, I think the way that I ended up as an erotic practitioner is the way I ended up in everything, which is I have been an explorer and a connoisseur, maybe I would say, of mystical states for as long as I can remember. And I was recently saying to a group of people that, I have a very strong erotic practice. So just for context, I have done a practice for almost 20 years called orgasmic meditation, which I will talk about a little bit later today and tomorrow. And that is the basis for how I live my life. So I might just say very simply, to give you some context, it's a 15-minute scientifically backed, structured practice. Two people. One person strokes the clitoris of another person in a protocoled structure way with no goal except to feel the sensation between them. And I just last week had a paper that was pre-published in a journal on orgasmic meditation as a vehicle to mystical experience. And I'm a big proponent and practitioner, but also believer that the sexual impulse, like psychedelics, like all things flow, is an avenue and a vehicle toward the mystical state. And in the mystical state, healing becomes a byproduct. And so I say all that to say that is how I ended up as an erotic practitioner, which was I was on a journey of sorts. So I'll go backwards and then I'll go forwards. I have been described, I think, my whole life as wild. I had a friend that said it best, which was, I never eradicated my animal nature. And so, I see things through in a very, very erotic lens, which is, just very briefly, Eros is that which connects. And I'm someone who, to the extent that I can, really live my life by this idea of love thine enemy. And I may not necessarily agree with what you believe or what you say, but I want to be able to argue your point better than you can. And I think that there's an erotic lens through which we can see life. And so maybe I'll say at this point, there's a body of work. So the woman that created orgasmic meditation and who wrote the undergirding philosophy that I follow, which is called the Eros Sutras. Her name is Nicole Daedone. And I would say, her mission is the liberation of the sexual impulse, and with the aim toward art and creation. And Tibetan Buddhism, it's called bodhicitta. So I say all that because I want to give credit for the work that I follow, but also I'm going to read you guys this sutra that she wrote. It's called The Presence or absence of Eros. This force of Eros, life's electricity flowing through us, powers the potential in all things. With the flow activated, what is unrealized in everyday life is revealed. We know the presence or absence of Eros by this quality of being lit from within, not superhuman, but fully human. When Eros is absent, our potential is not just dormant, it decays. Life with Eros is beauty. Devoid of Eros is sterility. A body filled with Eros is radiant. Devoid of Eros is trauma. The psyche filled with Eros is intuition. Devoid of Eros is chronic insufficiency. The spirit filled with Eros is union. Devoid of Eros is separation, presenting as addiction. Sexuality filled with Eros is immanence, emanation. Devoid of Eros is compensation for lack of love. The material world filled with Eros is fullness. Devoid of Eros is scarcity. The nervous system filled with Eros is inexhaustible energy. Devoid of Eros is tired and wired, stuffed and starving. The mystical self filled with Eros is profundity. Devoid of Eros is a lack of meaning. Desire filled with Eros is our guide. Devoid of Eros is restriction and control. And I think that sutra is just so pertinent. I would say with how I have dedicated my life, but also really my journey. And, I had this impulse, this erotic impulse that has been free my whole life. And, I met a certain set of conditions in the world, as we do, that had it be that I have tried all things. I have tried starving it. I had a 20-year journey with anorexia. I tried controlling it and managing it and being a good person and doing good things, and not that being a good person and doing good things is bad necessarily, but just in the context of for me, what I thought it meant to be a good woman. And typically in our culture, being a good woman equates not being a sexual woman, because being a sexual woman is seen as dangerous. And so I just want to echo back to how eloquently Jim said it in the beginning, which is, the erotic is the most powerful force in the world. And if you guys have seen the news of late, there has been a lot of stuff around woman, feminine, female sexual expression. And, for me, my own journey has been meeting my own conditioning and working through my own conditioning about what it means to be a sexual woman, and using those sexual energies toward what the Buddhists called bodhicitta, right? The idea of I want to get out of suffering and the causes of suffering, and I want to get other people out of suffering and the causes of suffering, and using my sexual energies toward art and toward creation. And so for me, I feel really passionate that the activation of the sexual energies has it be that I live in a state of eudaimonia, which loosely and very simply, it's a Greek term. Very simply, it means a state of human flourishing, which means that my native, organic, unique blueprint is activated in such a way I have a clear sense of what my purpose in this planet is. And, for me, and I would say this has been my experience personally in my journey, and really what led me to explore mystical states. But I would also say, as someone who has been an erotic practitioner for almost 2 decades and has worked with and walked with a lot of people in terms of the realm of the erotic, but also I'm an addiction counselor. And, I chose addiction counseling because I really love being with people in the trenches, in those darkest aspects of our psyche, because I think that's where the most beauty is. And I think even there's so much that's misunderstood and cast away and cast aside. And so I'd say I started my journey quite young. I used to dance. I was a ballerina. I loved it. And then I got into drugs, and this is for another time, but I definitely see addiction as a spiritual path and an advanced spiritual path. And then through my journey with addiction and sobriety, I found myself on an erotic path. And so, as I said, I found this practice, orgasmic meditation, and I've been doing the practice as a practitioner, studying and then teaching the practice in some kind of capacity for 18 and a half years. And I really do believe much the way that psychedelics is making headway into the mainstream. I believe that the erotic is our next pathway to that. And one moment, I just have some notes. So I guess I should define what I mean when I'm talking about Eros. I'd say if I were to give a simple definition, it's that which connects, and I can talk a little bit about that. So Eros is an impersonal, primal force of nature that arises from the ground of being and draws us into contact with life, changing us and life as a result. So it's how I think of art, right? There's the painter in the canvas, there's the writer in the page, the musician and the instrument. I think it's the same way. And this is why I chose for tomorrow the topic of erotic artists, because for me as an erotic practitioner, it's making love with life. It's taking things that are painful and perceived as ugly, not necessarily ugly, but perceived as ugly, and learning how to love them. And I would say, for me, because this is what I was told when I entered the path, which is if you were to enter with two phrases or two questions, the first one is, I came for this. I came for all of life, whatever it is. I came for the heartbreak. I came for the pain. I came for the joy. I came for the love. I came for all of this. And then the second is, how can I love this? How can I love this being that has shadow aspects and bossy aspects, and aspects that sometimes I would prefer aren't there, but are ultimately the source of greatest power. I often say to people, it's not things that are wrong about you. It's everything you think is wrong about you is actually everything that's right about you. It just needs the lens of the erotic to shine through. And so, it's this unfolding process of drawing together, touching, mutual altering, the erotic for me. And this is why orgasmic meditation is a partnered practice. We can't take ourselves out of control, that both of us are being changed and affected inside the experience. And, the erotic is a network of interiorly connecting essences that arise in response to this contact. Eros is the filament that runs through all of life. It aims for a harmony that will unite the primordial forces of the soul with the spiritual ideas of the above in a delicate balance. We know Eros through a dimension of perception that opens and shifts the ordinary to the extraordinary, occurring as a charged, magnetized emptiness. It draws forth when it is moved by what will bring us into and through our most cherished notions in order to restore wholeness and cultivate this perceptive capacity. Eros rests on the nexus of paradox, and that wholeness is found by organizing around a radiant absence. We know it not directly, but implicitly, the way we know electricity through a light bulb as light, or through a radiator as heat, or through a vehicle as motion. Operating by a set of laws, and this is what I was saying of what the Eros sutras are, and complementary to more conventional and familiar laws of the rational system of order. Eros connects us to and through its various realms by way of a chaotic order and a non-rational, not an irrational, but a non-rational intelligence. It draws us in through the power of desire, impulse, hunger, yearning, intuition, passion, and orients us to the primordial chaos that is the source of its power. And I would say that's true of any erotic practitioner, but I would also say it's true of women. And, you know, for me, it's been 18 and a half years of confronting at every turn what it means to be an erotic woman, what it means to lead with this idea that my appetite is my power, that desire is right, that desire it is the language of this realm. It's what brings us into contact with the material in a way. I know it experientially and not theoretically, and so which I should say is also an important piece about me, and you know how I ended up a lover of all things wild and a lover of all things mystical experience, because I want to know life experientially. You know, I'll just give you a funny example, and you can kind of see what kind of child I was, which is the same. I should say I'm the same as an adult. But you know, when I was younger, I used to lick the tips of batteries, you know, because it would give an electrical charge, an electrical jolt, and that's how I live my life. I live my life in search of that, uh, whatever it is, practice, experience, relationship, feeling that's going to activate something inside of me. And because I believe in activating all of those parts is where I come into a sense of union with all things. And yeah, it's been an intense journey. It continues to be an intense journey. And, you know, one of the things that drew me and attracted me to Ubiquity University is I had been in a previous PhD program, and, you know, wanted to write about the fact that you can use the sexual impulse, you can use the erotic as a vehicle toward the mystical. And it's oddly such a taboo subject to talk about. And, you know, I know it experientially from practicing orgasmic meditation as long as I have. And, you know, when I interviewed with Jim, just really out of the gate, he started asking questions in a way I felt, you know, comfortable enough to say, oh, you know, actually I'm a longtime practitioner of the erotic. And we got into this beautiful, deep, dynamic conversation of what that means. And so I just feel excited and grateful to be here, Jim. I don't know if you want me to keep going, if we dialogue now.
We can dialogue.
Okay.
Beautiful presentation. I love that sutra.
Yes. So, and I can put this in the chat if you want, but you can find the sutras on Amazon. There's 4 volumes. There's 5 total. One is currently in publication. They're called the Eros Sutras, and they're by Nicole Daedone. It's her body of work.
Now, is she still around, or is she?
Yeah, so she is the visionary. I would also say, you know, she's a visionary and an erotic artist. Everything she does is curated to the level of art. And so she, you know, she has a story that she was a Zen practitioner for years, and she went to a party, a Zen party with Zen Buddhists, and she met a guy, and the guy said, you know, hey, do you want to do this sexuality practice? And because he was Zen, she was like, sure. And the way that she tells the story is so they went, you know, there's a whole structure and protocol to the practice. And now actually we have 9 peer-reviewed published studies from, you know, some of the world's renowned neuroscientists. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Dr. Andrew Newberg. He just a brilliant, amazing human being who helped start an area of research called neurotheology, which is essentially both the idea of meaning and what brings meaning to people, but also what happens in the brain when you're practicing religious, spiritual, what I would call mystical practices. And so he has a wide variety of research. And so we found him a few years ago, and he had been kind of waiting for a sexuality-based practice to study for years. And what he is finding in his fMRI studies is the same brain frequencies that happen in and I mean like decades long meditators, you're seeing within a 15-minute container of a practice. And so anyway, I'll go back to Nicole for a second, which is she tried the practice. She had this moment of all of the chatter and the smog, kind of the, what we would say like monkey mind or smog of, self-doubt or whatever stopped. And, she entered into the state of emptiness and has really dedicated her life to ensuring, the world, to the extent that they want it, both have access to the practice, but also, the whole body, the philosophical body of what I would call feminine spirituality that comes behind it, which is, just this idea as a woman, asking myself the question, is it true? And then is it true for me as a woman? And, my path as a woman, my spiritual path is through the activation of the sexual energies. And so she's currently written and published 14 books. There's a volume of works behind her. So if you're interested more in the sutras, it's Nicole Daedone, the Eros Sutras. You can find it on Amazon.
And what's her name again?
Nicole Daedone.
How do you spell the last?
Daedone.
That don't.
Yeah. Daedone. Yeah.
Amazing. Maybe
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of her, so I'll look into that.
Yeah.
Because it'd be worth having, her on Humanity
I
Rising.
agree.
Good.
I agree.
Let's work on that. Let's work on
Yes,
that
I
because this
agree.
is such an important domain.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's stay for the moment on some of this research. It's very interesting that you're saying that the fMRI study that this neuro scientist is conducting is indicating that orgasmic meditation reaches the same height in a very short period of time as long-term meditators take to reach the same state.
Yes. Yes. So let's see. We've had a couple. So I'll talk about Dr. Andrew Newberg specifically. He also just wrote a book, a fascinating book called God, Sex, and the Brain, where he talks about, foundationally, all spiritual and religious practice at some point had sexuality, had a sexuality practice or ritual inside of it. And so, what he's finding is, because of the ritual around so it's very structured. So you could do the practice every day, multiple times a day. You could do it every day with the same person and have a totally different experience because it's structured. And because of the structure, the vigilant part of the mind that's always really, in a way, seeking to see if we're safe quiets down. And so the way he talks about it is the parietal lobe, which is, kind of where I believe executive functioning is, decreases. And the aspect of the mind, and I'll find it so I can quote it directly, but the aspect of the mind that gets activated in deep meditative states is increased. And it's interesting because so there's two positions in Om. There's the stroker, the person who's stroking, and there's the strokee, the person who's being stroked. The person who's being stroked has to have a clitoris. That's just part of the way that it works. And that's also very deliberate. You know, the clitoris is the most sensitive part on the human body. There's some scientists say 8,000, some say 15,000, but we know there's anywhere between 8,000 and 15,000 nerve endings. And so
Wow.
you're taking the part of the index finger, were you to get a paper cut, would be the most sensitive, which is the most dexterous. And you're stroking about as gently as you would if you were putting in contact lenses. So again, like not hard at all. It's like two sheets of tissue paper in terms of pressure. And you're doing it at different speeds, pressures, and intensity for 15 minutes. So what the research showed was for the people who were stroking, the executive function, meaning the part of the brain that has it be that we feel smarter and clearer, increased, which is good. You want an increase in executive function. And for the strokee, for the person who is being stroked, the part of the brain that activates relaxation increased. So they're having different but complementary experiences. So then if I relate it in terms of the mystical experience, right? And just for context, there's so if you look at mystical experience and if you look at how you would quantify it basically, and for those of you that are familiar with Dr. Roland Griffiths, was a very prestigious psychedelic researcher, came up with the mystical experience questionnaire, which we used. The characteristics are ineffability, right? A feeling of unity with all things, sense of transiency and timelessness, sense of ecstasy and bliss, sense of sacredness, altered perception, and a sense of passivity. So this paper that we published analyzed two sets of journals. One was from 55 practitioners, so a total of 1,506 journal entries. So that was set one. And then set two were journal entries from two different time periods, 2003 and 2012, from Nicole Daedone. Across the board, all of the data showed that people were describing mystical experiences. Now, it didn't matter if they were stroking or they were being stroked. They were reporting at some point during the 15-minute experience, entering into a mystical state.
Extraordinary.
Yes.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah, the notion of Eros as a portal to the mystical
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
essentially what the findings are indicating.
Yes. Yes, they are. Yeah.
And is there data, Rachel, on the duration of this? You know, people who meditate, you know, they like a Thich Nhat Hanh, they're like in a perpetual state of primal mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the meditative practice builds up in the psyche and soul to finally you're kind of this there. I
Yeah.
would imagine that the orgasmic meditation would be more of a spike.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you would think that because when you look at it kind of like from the outside, you think like, oh, it's a sex-based practice, right? Somebody stroking someone's genitals for 15 minutes. However, it's closer to meditation than it is to sex because what you're doing is a few things. One is you're removing the goal of climax. So typically what
Right?
happens
Yes.
is,
Good
right,
one.
in any kind of sexual experience, you're building, 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 building. You get to the top, right? If you look at it at a bell curve, you get to the top of the bell, right? There's some kind of release or explosion, and then there's a drop off point. And then there's what's called a refractory period, right? So a period of time where you then have to build the energy back up, so to speak. With with orgasmic meditation, what you're doing is extend. So where most people stop at a sexual experience is where we start. So for us, and I mean us, like people who practice orgasmic meditation, orgasm is not synonymous with climax. Orgasm is synonymous with sexual impulse. And so if you think of the point where I'm about to go over an edge, I'm about to release, you can train your body to open. When you open, there's a whole, just if we're just talking at the level of sensation, forget everything else for a second, just at the level of sensation, what's available to you is really beyond what anyone can really, I mean, so for me, how I got into OM was I got diagnosed anorgasmic when I was 25 or 26, which basically kind of basically means you can't climax. And so I had this idea for years that there was something wrong with me because how I had been taught or how I knew about sex conventionally didn't actually fit to the way my body worked. And then I tried OM and I had this moment. I mean, we can kind of say this is why I dedicated myself to the practice. Is I had this moment in an OM where I could feel, but the feeling was like electricity. So I talked about, licking batteries when I was a kid, that same jolt. It was this really thin, hot pulsation that traveled up the center of my body. And I remember in that moment thinking, wait a second, I can feel the narrative that I'm being sold and the experience that I'm having physically are not aligned. And so as I started practicing, there was this whole aspect of sensation that I was able to get access to that I didn't have access to before. But I didn't have access to it because I had a belief that there was something, quote, wrong with me, which again goes back to the point you made in the beginning, which is anything related to the erotic is confronting, right? And then we're scared of it. And anything that, I'll speak for myself, and I won't, well, I could make a broad statement, but I won't. We're all just getting to know each other, which is, for me, if I'm afraid of something, my tendency to demonize it is a lot higher. And so you're talking about a structured, scientifically backed practice where you're telling me it's not sex. I'm kind of like, okay, that's weird. Then you're saying, okay, well, not only is it that, but it liberates sexual energy in such a way, healing is a byproduct. The focus isn't healing. Healing's a byproduct. And it's a byproduct because all of a sudden you have access to your blueprint. You just know at a visceral level, forget at a cognitive level. I know at a visceral level what I'm supposed to be doing on this planet. And, I'm a woman, like I have a lot of sexual energy. So there's a lot that I want to do with it in terms of making the world a better place and leaving the world better than I found it. And then you're saying to me, oh, well, it's not even all these other things. It's also about the fact that being a sexual woman who has an appetite is right and good and needed. And I was like, what? You're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it. And at the time I said I was going to give myself 5 years. And if at the end of the 5 years, I still thought it was nuts, I was going to stop doing it. And I think I was 2 years in when I realized that there was a whole world that I had been able to access, through psychedelics and other means that I could access in 15 minutes. And so for me, it was like, oh, okay, and part of my passion is ensuring that there continues to be science behind it, that
Mm,
because
mm.
for me, and I was someone also, I had a PTSD diagnosis when I came in, and I know experientially that, well, I also know this from being a clinician, but the erotic is left out of most
Totally.
realms of therapy and recovery. And for me, it's like, no, 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 no. It is the most healing force on the planet. That is the very thing that will transform trauma into power. That all of this pain and anguish that I have, that's actually my gift. That's what I'm supposed to bring to the world, is that level of healing and clarity.
Yes, yes. Well said. Well said. And then once you really gain the experience, everything you thought you knew ends up you don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
all the things that you thought you didn't know is what you come to know.
Yeah.
And it's in that inversion of
Yeah.
epistemology that the liberation comes.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And, and then that's the healing is the byproduct because the malady is a function of the imprisonment of the psyche and mind.
Yes, totally. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up Freud because it reminded me of this quote from Maslow. And he said this, I'm summarizing, but basically he said, it's time to focus on potential. That Freud did this incredible job of focusing on the pathology that surrounds the erotic, right? All of our neuroses around it. And by the activation of the eudaimonic state, right, this state of flourishing, you not only heal, but you reach peak human potential. And that it was really time to focus both research, but also therapy on that notion that the activation of that is what's healing. It's not, and this was very much my experiences. I had this drive almost to heal myself because it's like you get a diagnosis at 25 or 26 about being anorgasmic, and at the time it's different now, but at the time they kind
You
of
anorexic at that time?
I was also anorexic at the time, yes.
Oh God, wow.
Yeah, so if you think about it, which is funny, if you think about it, it was a whole cycle of restriction and starvation, right?
Yeah, at
Which
every level,
at every
physical,
level.
emotional, and
Exactly.
psychological.
Yeah,
So
totally. Just yeah, at every level, I was like, how can I suppress this force that's inside of me? And so, anorexia was one way. Then I got this diagnosis. And, at the time, they just patted you on the shoulder and said, well, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. You've had this trauma in your past that's now going to follow you through the rest of and I was young. I
yeah.
was 25 is young. It's going to follow you through the rest of your life, and you're not going to enjoy sex but have a nice life. And I think for
And we
me,
have these little pills that you can take to manage the problem.
well, now they do. At the time there wasn't a pill, thank God. But now they do. Now it's just like, let me give you more and more medication to numb the fact that
Yeah, and numb.
you're already so bound up inside. And I think partially because you know I don't know if it's just that I have a resilient constitution. I don't know that it's also that um I'm
Well, you found the right path for you.
yes, yes.
Once that happens, your constitution is proportional to your alignment with your own authenticity.
Yeah.
In the end.
Yeah. 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 It's so interesting. And I think also, our culture is set up to, I'm going to make a very controversial statement here, which is I think our whole culture is set up to infantilize women because if the sexual impulse was liberated in women, right? If you saw the liberation of sexual energies, it would totally flip the script, because the erotic is the force powerful enough to subdue greed, hatred, and delusion. So if you can imagine women taking back on the mantle of their own erotic, of their own sexuality, not only would you see a very different world, but you would see a world where women are in the position of reception. I don't mean passive. I mean like reception in the way a plant pulls in carbon dioxide and transforms it to oxygen, which I believe is what erotic energies do. But then you would see, if we're talking about in terms of masculine and feminine, you'd then see the masculine executing in this really beautiful way the vision of the feminine. And women get so mad at men, but it's like, wait a second, we foisted our sexual responsibility onto men and then we got mad. It's like, no, just pull it back into your own body.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about men for a minute.
Okay, let's do it.
Now, I understand what you're saying about
Yes.
the clitoris and the importance of the woman being the stimulated, and the man stimulating, and you're saying that in the course of that 15 minutes, they both reach
We'll
an
say
ecstatic state,
mystical state. Yeah, mystical
mystical
experience.
state.
Yes, yes.
But you're saying you can't reverse it. The
Correct.
stimulation of the male
Well,
doesn't do that.
but so here's the thing. And this is it's interesting because I used to get asked this question for years. What's in it for the men? I mean, the ironic thing is it was usually women asking, not men. Because men, in a way, if you talk to most men, here's just a taboo viewpoint. If you talk to most men, they're like, yeah, like stroking, let's say, a woman's genitals for 15 minutes, like I'm totally in. You know what I mean? And they're having different but complementary experiences. So there's a couple of things that happen. One is OM is an attention training practice. So again, it's not a sexuality practice. It trains your attention, and it trains it in different ways. So for the strokee, for the person being stroked, right? We'll say a woman in this case. It's all of the mental chatter that I have in my head about my body, my attractiveness, how I sound, how I look. If I can pull all of that down into my genitals, right? And I'll say to start, for me at least, it was focusing very, very simply on where the stroker's finger was in contact with my clitoris, and then following up, because it's like up, down, it's just in two directions, up or down, up, down for 15 minutes. So when I was able to pull my attention from what was happening up here down into my body, but into my genitals, all of a sudden there was this whole world that opened, but also I was able to really surrender into the experience, right? The same way, I was able to do it in psychedelics, I was able to do it in OM. For the stroker, it's training their attention, because our culture is so prone to climax. And I don't just mean sexually. I mean like pretty
Everything.
much in everything.
Exactly.
It's like how we
We want
eat.
it all and we want it now.
Totally. But I even think the way like people work, right? It's like, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to reach a certain point. I'm going to retire. And then I'm going to chill out. But then you watch this drop off and people retire and then they get depressed because it's like they expelled everything. They expelled all creativity or life force or whatever it is. So for the person stroking, it's training attention. And in the training of attention, it's cultivating sensitivity. Because if I as a man only know to stroke hard and fast, and I'm like literally talking about stroking hard and fast, right? A woman's body works very differently. And you add in that you're stroking the clitoris, which is the most sensitive spot. And so hard and fast in that context is going to net a totally different experience, because what the practice cultivates is connection and empathy. And so if you talk to most men who own and who own for a while, they'll say to you, I have better attention and clarity. So you remember I was talking about executive function. So I'll just tell you this cool thing. So the first study that we did was with Dr. Nicole Prousey and Dr. Greg Siegel. She is a sexuality researcher, and she will often say, if you think climate scientists have it bad, you should speak to sexuality researchers. Like they just get their asses kicked. And it was the first
Like
part.
there's climate denial and then there's sexuality
Exactly,
denial.
exactly. And
Totally.
so it was the first partnered study to happen since Masters and Johnson. And one of the things that they did was they had us take a series of tests, like cognitive tests before, and it was through EEGs. So they had us do the cognitive test before. Then we had the 15-minute OM session. And then they had us do the same tests after. The reason they did that is because most people think, oh, if you practice erotically in any way, right? You have a sexuality practice, you have an erotic practice, clearly you're stupid. Sexual people are stupid people, right? And so they wanted to show not only is that not true, but the practice made us all faster. So they looked at before the amount of time that it took to take the test and the amount of time after. And I'm just talking about time. I'm not even talking about what, like the answers and stuff, just in time. The time after was faster, because when you come out of the OM, there's a certain clarity and clearness of mind that you access.
Mhm.
And so there's this idea that it's like reciprocity. I do you and you do me, but that's not the case in OM. We're having different, but we're also having complementary experiences.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. 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 So that the men then really in an inversion of patriarchy serve
Yes.
women.
Yes.
And in serving the women, they themselves experience a release.
Well, here's the thing that's interesting is both people are in service to the erotic energy that's between them. The erotic energy just comes through my body. But both of us, and this is the thing that's interesting when you look at the science, is you're like, oh my God, they really are having complementary experiences. So you look at it in terms of, Dr. Andy's study with the fMRI, right? Like what's happening in the brain. The brain signatures are very similar. Then you look at it in terms of, executive function, right, from the EEG studies, which is, everyone got faster and clearer. And then you look at it in terms of mystical state. And across the board, it doesn't matter if you're a man stroking or you're a woman being stroked, you're still accessing the mystical experience.
That's really amazing.
Yeah,
That's
I think
really
so.
amazing.
Yeah.
And is there any difference with a woman stimulating a woman and a man stimulating a woman? Have been studies on the effect of a woman?
In the stroker position,
Yeah.
there have not yet, but it's on our, we have a long list of things that we want to research. And and that's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Rachel, this has been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. This has been wonderful.
It's been fascinating because, you know, one of our themes for Humanity Rising is that there are practices that we all have access to for
Yeah.
free,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yes.
Our breath,
Yeah.
everybody breathes.
Yes.
Focus on your breath. Anybody can do it anytime, anywhere, and you don't have to pay anybody any money unless you want to go to a class and so forth and so on.
Right.
And you're really teaching us about the the foundational principle of Eros and everything that actually produces the healing that we seek.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can activate it unconsciously, or we can activate it consciously.
Yes, exactly.
And
Yeah.
your pathway, this Om pathway, is the ignition of this in a very controlled, conscious, non-sexual way that actually liberates the erotic,
Yeah.
which is the basis of all.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved when you said that. It's the foundation of life.
Yeah, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I can hardly wait till tomorrow.
I know, me too. Maybe we'll just do part two tomorrow.
Well, that's good. Well, listen, thank you
Thank you so
uh,
much.
so much. That's Rachel Pelletier, everyone, with a whole very powerful technique and understanding of the human being in terms of human sexuality and more profoundly, the eros that undergirds all of life, because it's not present just in humans, it's present in everything. And I really like what you said a few minutes ago, Rachel. It's like photosynthesis.
Yeah,
It's taking
exactly.
in, it's transforming, and it's giving out. And if we could train ourselves to harness our own sexuality that way and combine the eros and the sexual, what a world we would have. It would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Rachel's going to join the after chat.
Yes,
You'll
I
see the
will.
link in the chat box, everyone, and you receive the link to the after chat in your Zoom reminder for today. And then tomorrow, Rachel will be back for a second and final session on discovering the erotic. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.